Hello, and welcome to Lecture 2 in Chapter 3 of the Psychology of Personal Growth class. And as you'll note from Lecture 1, this is a continuation of our discussion on Erikson's psychosocial stages. And we will also include the ideas of Dr. Jeffrey Arnett, who expanded on Erikson's sixth stage and talked about the idea of emerging adulthood. However, we will start with Erikson, and as we saw in the first lecture, we have multiple charts to enhance our understanding of Erikson and give us different views of his stages. And just a reminder, Lecture 1 went through these first 5 stages, and the second lecture will focus on the last 3 stages. So I'll go through Erikson's last 3 stages, and then we will bounce back into the young adult stage and compare Erikson's stage of young adulthood with Jeffrey Arnett's emerging adulthood theory. So the young adult stage, you may see this listed as 18 to 35 years of age, 19 to 40 as you see here. And as I mentioned in Lecture 1, Erikson's stages are associated with ages, but that age range varies since our developmental phases also vary. And we can't say just because an individual has turned 19, they are at this particular stage of development. So we have the very simplified chart. And then again, thanks to Joe Keegan, we have an intermediary chart. And you'll see the age shifts in some of these ranges in comparison with the simplified chart. However, the crisis and the task remains the same, the name of the stage is the same, and then the potential problems are also the same. And so I will then look to the third chart, the one we looked at in Lecture 1, to continue this lecture. So, young adulthood. The core crisis or challenge in young adulthood is intimacy versus isolation. And if you think of these ages, 18 to 35 or 19 to 40 or 21 to 35 or 40, think of all the components that go into our development in this phase of our life, and you'll see this is a wide range of experiences, challenges, and personality development happening within this young adulthood stage. And so what did Erikson mean by intimacy versus isolation? Well, you'll notice the basic virtue or the strength he identified here is love. And the website Business Balls has added affiliation to this as well. And so love, intimacy is referring not only to romantic involvement with another person, but also our familial relationships and our intimate friendships, and developing close ties with others, developing intimacy and trust. And Erikson believed this is the time in which it's key for an individual to really achieve a sense of receiving and giving love, establishing an emotional connection with another person, times physical connections with other people, and really seeking out the support and the extended connection with others. And then the opposite of that would be that of isolation, feeling excluded. And while this may happen within particular relationships, has the individual developed an overall ability to establish close connections and maintain those relationships? Of course, everyone encounters relationships that do not enhance them, that may in fact be damaging to someone. And yet, are you able to then push past those negative experiences and still be able to connect with others? And that's really the core task here when Erickson refers to intimacy versus isolation. And so the maladaptations that Erickson identified in this phase is promiscuity, the giving away of our affection, our love, our bodies, perhaps, in a promiscuous way, not establishing close emotional connections necessarily, or establishing multiple close connections that may not enhance us, or exclusivity, not being able to expand our relationships to establish significant support systems outside of one or two other people, or perhaps our family. And so the ages of young adulthood is really the time frame in which Erickson said we develop this sense of love or intimacy with others, as opposed to a maladaptation, which might be alienation or feelings of isolation, or perhaps self-centeredness might also be a maladaptation if an individual is not able to achieve or meet this crisis or task. The seventh stage in Erickson's development is that of middle adulthood. And again, you'll see the ages listed as 40 to 65, or 35 to 60, 35 to 70. It's that middle age range. And this is where Erickson says we have a sense of generativity, of producing something, of engaging in activities that expand our scope to not just include ourselves, but those around us, our children perhaps, or if we don't have immediate children, the next generation or society in general. A sense of generativity. Notice the root of that word, generativity and generation. So are we producing something that we can then pass on to others to enhance the world around us? Or are we developing a sense of stagnation where we're not necessarily able to move outside of ourselves and accomplish something that goes beyond self-interest? And so many people may associate generativity with having children or caring for children, but it goes much further than that. And just being a parent does not necessarily guarantee that you have met this crisis or this challenge. And vice versa, you don't need to be a parent in order to obtain a sense of generativity. But are you able to define yourself and have a sense of accomplishment outside of your own self-interest? And that's what is referred to in the larger sense of generativity. And so this includes giving back to your community, developing a philosophy. Perhaps you have found a particular focus or cause with which you identify, and that has become a main goal for you to accomplish and feel success. On the other hand, you may see a sense of stagnation occur in these ages. And in our culture, we often refer to this as the midlife crisis, where someone is looking back, they've realized they may have lived half the years they're going to live in their lifetime, and they don't feel like they have reached the goals that they've set out for themselves. And so they may feel stagnant. They may feel as though they've run across roadblocks that they can't quite push past. And those are some of the components that we see with people who may encounter a midlife crisis, and they go through an identity crisis, really, and redefine themselves in some way. And often you'll see people have some shifts that allow them to move forward in order to access this sense of generativity. And so the core values associated here are care and productivity. The maladaptations, or malignancies as they're sometimes referred to with Erickson, would be overextension. Uh, if you're constantly doing things just to keep yourself afloat, you may find a sense of burnout happens in this phase, or rejectivity, where you are rejecting some of the things that you have set out for yourself to do, and that would be the redefinition of one's identity um, that may need to occur in order to find the balance between generativity and stagnation. And so that is the middle adulthood phase. And then the final phase in Erickson's psychosocial stages is that of older adulthood. And the ages here is sometimes 60, 65, 70, until a person's death. And this late adulthood stage, the core crises here is integrity versus despair. And this is really a looking back on one's life, where they evaluate, an individual will evaluate how they feel about their time here. And that sense of an end to one's mortality can be very powerful. And looking back and cataloging what someone has done within their lifetime is a pretty profound idea. And so Erickson said, you know, one would want to find a balance between integrity or the opposite, which would be despair. Looking back on despair would be a sense of looking back on your life and feeling as though you haven't done what you set out to do. Not so much just in terms of outward success, but have you really fostered the type of life that you've wanted to in your relationships, in your work, in what you've produced. And so the core value here, or the basic virtue or strength, is wisdom. Have you been able to gain a sense of wisdom that allows you to feel integrity when you look back upon your life? And so this is really looking at the big questions. Were you able to find purpose and meaning throughout your time? Are you able to make peace with yourself? And the maladaptation, the malignancy, would be guilt, perhaps, self rejection. We have presumption here, or disdain. And that would go along with despair, hopelessness. And that's not where Erickson believed we would want to find ourselves at this last stage. We would prefer to tend more toward the integrity, the hopefulness, and the feeling of success, and the feeling of life having meaning at this point. So that's the end of our look at Erickson's 8 stages, and I would like to compare that. We're going to go backwards a little bit. Go back to the young adult stage. And remember, this is 18 to 40 or 19 to 35, 21 to 35, where Erickson believed the crisis was intimacy versus isolation. And I'd just like to compare that with the ideas of Dr. Jeffrey Arnett and his theory called emerging adulthood. So Arnett expanded upon Erickson's ideas and really saw emerging adulthood as a different stage that allows individuals to really begin to explore their identities. The young adult is looking not just at relationships and intimacy, but also at these three key ideas. Of course, love is and intimacy is one of the main tenets of this phase. But Arnett also stressed uh, finding work that is meaningful, something that an individual can identify with, something that aligns with their personality, not just a job, but something that one might be called to do, a vocation, a career. And you may have even taken some personality tests that lined up your key characteristics and your personality traits with corresponding careers that would fit your skill set or your personality. And then he also added worldview, where you're really establishing your your outlook on the world in multiple frameworks. So, how are you integrating or establishing your connection within a cultural context, within a political context, or perhaps a religious context? And so, this is the time frame in which individuals begin to move away from or more openly adopt the values and the worldviews of the family. Some individuals end up rejecting some of the familial values that they've been taught, and others end up embracing them, or often it's more often than not, it's a combination of the two. And so Arnett believed that there are really a couple of key ideas that are happening here in this phase. And someone's accepting responsibility for establishing themselves, establishing their perspective on the world, their perspective on work, and their establishment of relationships. And really, someone is becoming independent and autonomous in this phase of their existence. So, the next couple slides I will just move through quickly just to give you a sense of the dramatic shift that happens in young adulthood. And these statistics come from the United States, and of course, they would shift significantly if we were to look at other cultures. But adolescence, prior to age 18 or right around age 18, 95% of teens live at home, 98% are unmarried, fewer than 10% have children, and over 95% are enrolled in school. And of course, most of that makes sense. So by age 30, the end of emerging adulthood, or the ages at which Arnett ended his look at this phase, 75% have married, 75% have become parents, and fewer than 10% are enrolled in school. And so if you think about that, you can see how Arnett's theory has quite a bit of value in terms of identifying a subphase within Erickson's larger stage of early adulthood. And then after leaving home, in between that 18 and 30, about a third of young adults attend college. About 40% move out for independent living or full-time and finding full-time work. 2/3 experience cohabitation with a romantic partner, and only about 10% remain at home until marriage. Now, some of these statistics we are seeing change a bit. In fact, these statistics are a few years old, and my guess would be some of the most recent research has seen a bit of an increase in this percentage, mostly based on economics. As the economy took a downturn in 2008, it became much more difficult for individuals to remain independent and financially stable without cohabitating, whether that is with a partner or friends. You see a lot of young adults who have roommates that aren't necessarily their romantic partners, or they've moved back home and are living with parents in order to reestablish some financial stability. And so we'll see that shift as the economy shifts back or begins to shift back into a more healthier uh, state in terms of employment statistics and the ability for people to become financially independent again. So it's interesting to look at this stage and compare the ideas of Erickson and also the ideas of Arnett. And I'll be interested to hear some of your ideas on which view of this phase you find to be most relevant within the framework in which we are today. So that concludes our discussion of Erickson and Arnett and the psychosocial stages of development. And we will use the activities that I have posted on the Moodle Room site and some of the assignments to really apply these phases. This information in these first couple chapters is really foundational, and I recognize that between my postings and the information in the textbook, there have been a lot of theories that we have established in these first couple chapters. For the rest of the course, we will now begin to apply these theories. And you'll see that happening with Eric Berne's theory on transactional analysis and Dr. Albert Ellis's rational emotive behavioral therapy, where we use the developmental stages and theories as a backdrop for applying some of the cognitive behavioral therapies that that we're looking at in chapter 3 as well. Thank you.